what's interesting is, after many years, I've been in the medical sales, medical industry for over 20 years. Have worked with, small, medium, largest medical device companies in the world, and, some really talented people. And all through my journey, which everybody's journey is different, but what I found was so many of the things that I applied that worked really well, and these principles and foundational elements to my success as well as many others were things that I learned and drew correlations to from team sports. And specifically for me, basketball. I also played soccer. I ran track, but, ended up being fortunate enough to play in college at a, pretty decent level. To me, a lot of these lessons really came to light later as I look back and I said, wow, having incredible vision, as a basketball player, especially again, a point guard, you have to have your head up. You have to be looking down the court all the time, really seeing the game. Vision's really important in business, right?
What would be your advice to beat a giant competitor or these teams that have a lot of expertise, that know what they're doing, that have a lot of reputation, these things?
Sometimes we don't want to go beat them. We want to join them or to align to them. But you're absolutely right. I think as you enter, different verticals within any kind of medical sales, you're going to face market leaders. Even if you have a disruptive technology. And one of the areas that I've, been fortunate but also focused on was not entering markets that were Me Too products, but really trying to bring something different to the market. And when you bring a disruptive technology or a new solution, some of those large competitors, maybe you're not going head on head, but you're riding right along the side of them.
We are in a moment where spine surgeries are on the rise. The market is quite huge. There is lots of big players out there, but you came into the space and you came with a differentiated product and a differentiated company, no? So can you share us, because you've mentioned the vision, no? That is so important to you. What is your vision in that space?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. We entered a very, very competitive marketplace in spinal hardware, spinal implants, but Providence's approach has been very mission driven. Our mission is to establish circumferential cervical fusion as the standard of care for high risk patients. And why I mention that is that that's a very specific niche within, the patient population, but also this very specific procedure where we're not necessarily competing with any of the giants. We're adding to what they're already offering their customers to get an enhanced outcome for a patient population that desperately needs it.
In the field, you score only once, like you have one place to score. But in MedTech, to win a hospital, you not only need to score the surgeon and them getting the yes, but you also need to score the hospital, no? So what's the advice to scoring the hospital, no? And is it value-based care? How do you build this value proposition that gets hospitals excited to get your product on board?
Well, it definitely starts with the clinical evidence helps a lot. Yeah. When you have clinical evidence and you have really strong labeling from your regulatory body. So for us, it's the FDA.
And it has been really special because we've combined principles that athletes use to play in their game, but we've applied this into MedTech and health tech. So you are interested on hearing more about how all this works and to learn about these principles, there's going to be the link here below so you can go and see and download it and have a read. All right. Thank you so much, Jeremy, for joining us. Jeremy comes from a startup company on the cervical spine and also is the author of his own book. So it's really interesting to hear from you and also to hear all the insights from your book. So it's a very different story because you have insights from sport and from athletes that you develop a book and that you are also applying into the entrepreneurship and to the business world and the healthcare world. So it would be really interesting to get your thoughts around that topic.
Yeah, well, happy to be here, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so the first question would be this, no? From basketball to MedTech, no? What are the basketball principles that shape your management style?
Well, I think, one of the things I talk about in the book is called just leading from the front, meaning leading by example. So when we ask people or you ask a team member to do something that you're really comfortable, one, doing it yourself and maybe even have domain expertise, but really aren't afraid to do the activities, the tactics, really live the strategy that you're asking your team to perform and do as well. So I think leading from the front has always served me very well, as well as many of the mentors that I've been fortunate enough to work with. They're always leaders that, they don't sit behind the desk and give direction, but they show you how to do what they want you to do, and or they really believe in and I think live the virtues and the principles that they believe in and talk about, instead of maybe just directing people around and delegating, which you have to be able to do at times. But I think great leaders kind of embody what they're asking of their team. And when others see that the leader is able to accomplish or do or act a certain way, that it's much easier to get behind that person and follow them because they're authentic. And I think great leaders show that authenticity, and they really care about their people. They care about the mission that they're on. And, so I think leading from the front is one of the big principles that I talk about again in the book as kind of a point guard on a basketball team. Many times you're a leader, right? Because you're handling the ball. You're the one that's running the plays and choosing the strategy, maybe in collaboration with your coach, but live time on the court. So, you have to execute and do what you're asking your team to do as well. So that's a big one for, I think, from a leadership standpoint.
It's really cool, the parallelism that you do between basketball and business. What inspired you to say, all right, like I had expertise, or I did basketball in the past. What inspired you to say, okay, let's bring these principles here?
What's interesting is, after many years, I've been in the medical sales, medical industry for over 20 years. Have worked with, small, medium, largest medical device companies in the world, and, some really talented people. And all through my journey, which everybody's journey is different, but what I found was so many of the things that I applied that worked really well, and these principles and foundational elements to my success, as well as many others, were things that I learned and drew correlations to from team sports. And specifically for me, basketball. I also played soccer. I ran track, but, ended up being fortunate enough to play in college at a, pretty decent level. To me, a lot of these lessons really came to light later as I looked back, and I said, wow, having incredible vision, as a basketball player, especially again, a point guard, you have to have your head up. You have to be looking down the court all the time, really seeing the game. Vision's really important in business, right? Vision's really important in life. You have to know where you want to be, where you want to go, what do you want to accomplish before you can set kind of a path and a series of objectives to reach that destination, right? So vision to me was like this kind of starting point. And then, I talked about leading from the front. Assists, for instance, assists as a guard in basketball are really important. You got to get the right player the ball to score many times. The point guard doesn't always do all the scoring. Again, in business, how do you set other people up? Could be your customer, could be people that are your colleagues or teammates. If you're a leader, it could be the people that work for you. How do you set them up to win? How do you set them up to have sustained performance over time? So assisting, the same thing that was really important in basketball, was really important in business. And, I go through a whole series of these, basically 8 principles that I felt really stood out both on the basketball court, but also in business, that worked and were really important for being successful in both worlds.
And what are the things that you see that sometimes, this is a tricky question, MedTech or health tech companies do wrong, like in terms of teams and in terms of leadership?
Yeah, I would say, and start by kind of mentioning, MedTech's a hard business. There's so many great medical technologies that come out or try to come to the market, but they never make it. They just don't get the thrust. They run out of money. They get stuck in maybe some sort of regulatory or registration approval process. Many times it is the funding, because it's so expensive. You need so much capital to take a medical technology to the market, right? And I think maybe more specifically, to kind of dig into a certain angle, that the commercialization process, many times I think leadership, depending on what their goals, are, and everybody wants to be successful, they may jump ahead or skip steps. And one of the really important steps to building a great team is, one, understanding, again, kind of getting back to that vision is, what do we want to accomplish in the next 90 days, 180 days? 3, 5 years from now? And what are the steps that have to happen? Kind of working backwards from in 5 years, we want to be at blank. What happened at year 4.5, at year 4, at year 3, at year 2, the whole way back? And it kind of this idea of like the Merlin principle, where you look in the future and you build your business plan back to where you're currently at, but not skipping steps. And some of those steps can be a little bit arduous. Sometimes, you could be faced with a lot of pressure and say, you know what, we're going to skip this important step. For instance, it'd be nice to have a great sales training program, but I don't know if we want to hire a sales trainer. I don't know if we want to take that extra time from these salespeople. Let's just get them out into the field and get started in the selling process. Well, if you skip that step, and even if you have talented people, but you haven't developed a sales process, for instance, and you don't train everybody on that sales process or even understand what that sales process is for your technology, how well are they going to perform? So I think one of the big mistakes that I've seen over time is those steps that just get bypassed because of lack of funding, lack of time, lack of patience. And many times you just have to be patient. You have to stay the course. And I'm not saying don't be flexible. You have to be flexible in this business, but I think the willingness to kind of stay the course, stay true to what you're trying to accomplish and do the fundamentals along the way, it pays dividends. And if you do the right activities the right way over time, you will be successful. It's just when, right? It's not an if, it's when.
One of the things that you've been doing, no, because you've had like 20 years of experience in MedTech and especially in startups, no? You've worked in teams that are competing against giant companies, like big giant teams. So your team was smaller, but you needed to develop this team in order to giant teams, no? What would be your advice to beat a giant competitor or these teams that have a lot of expertise, that know what they're doing, that have a lot of reputation, these things?
Sometimes we don't want to go beat them. We want to join them or find ways to align to them. But you're absolutely right. I think as you enter, different verticals within any kind of medical sales, you're going to face market leaders, even if you have a disruptive technology. And one of the areas that I've, I guess, been fortunate, but also focused on was not entering markets that were Me Too products, but really trying to bring something different to the market. And when you bring a disruptive technology or a new solution, some of those large competitors, maybe you're not going head on head, but you're riding right along the side of them. And they don't really notice you because you're not embarking, you're not taking away, you're not cannibalizing any of their business yet, but you might be sharing, time with their customer. You may be getting spot in the operating room during cases that they're currently in. Maybe you're, taking a little bit of business, but not a lot. And I think to that end, trying to stay out of the crosshairs of some of the big giants that have lots of resources, lots of expertise, lots of representation is a good strategy for smaller companies. Now, push comes to shove, at some point you're going to show up on the radar as you grow. And I think if you're differentiated and you've got a really strong value proposition, you can defend yourself pretty well. If you're a Me Too product trying to take market share from one of the big leaders, it's a challenge, right? And, again, I haven't put myself in positions that I felt we had a great disadvantage due to that. I've always sought out technologies that were what I felt very different from what was being offered from the giants. And when you do the fundamentals, again, kind of back to what I mentioned earlier, in building high performance teams to challenge the market, you're looking for talent that's not afraid to go head to head, have the courage to go out and have disruptive type of conversations with those customers and win the business, not because you're better than the maybe the big players, but you're different and you know how to differentiate and you know how to bring an additional value to the customer that they're not currently receiving just based on what's available to them in the market. So I'm not sure if I answered your question directly, but I think, in the instance where you're going to take a giant head on, you have to have a very sound strategy. And I would be very focused on specific markets, specific segments of customers versus trying to win it all. Because I think it's an uphill battle against some of the big competition.
Yeah. I think you've mentioned it perfectly, having like a differentiation so that you can position yourself in the field much better. And this fits on perfectly with what you're doing exactly right now, because you're in cervical spine. So we are in a moment where spine surgeries are on the rise. The market is quite huge. There is lots of big players out there, but you came into the space and you came with a differentiated product and a differentiated company, no? So can you share us, because you've mentioned the vision, no, that is so important to you. What is your vision in that space?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. We entered a very, very competitive marketplace in spinal hardware, spinal implants, but Providence's approach has been very mission driven. Our mission is to establish circumferential cervical fusion as the standard of care for high risk patients. And why I mention that is that that's a very specific niche within the patient population, but also this very specific procedure where we're not necessarily competing with any of the giants. We're adding to what they're already offering their customers to get an enhanced outcome for a patient population that desperately needs it. And what we found through a very large clinical trial was that high risk patients, meaning patients that suffer from multiple levels of cervical spine disease, also that have comorbidities like diabetes, nicotine use, morbid obesity, maybe even advanced age or osteopenia, these patients have a tough time getting the outcome that the surgeon desires with their current offering. So by adding our technology, we're able to take these patient outcomes from fairly decent to really, really good and give that probability to the patient and the surgeon of a long-term sustained outcome that they can depend on over and over again. And by adding our technology, we didn't add increased morbidity. We didn't increase the length of stay for the procedure. We didn't increase blood loss or post-op narcotic use. So in essence, by adding this kind of secondary procedure to the standard ACDF or anterior construct, we actually made it a safer procedure. And that focused kind of approach, I think, has served us very well. And now we're venturing into the lumbar spine as well. We feel like there's a patient population that we can serve with our unique technology. We're very focused on the posterior elements, the facet joints of the spine. And I don't want to get ultra technical, but we're very focused on a very specific part of spine pathology and supporting our surgeon community and patient community where we feel there's an unmet need. And that has served us very well. And, I've been with Providence now, I'm going on my 8th year with the organization. And we've been really, really fortunate to experience tremendous success over the last few years as we've really focused on that high risk patient population, put in the hard work to do clinical trials, which not every company does, especially an early stage, mid stage, smaller MedTech company, because trials cost millions and millions of dollars. And they take lots and lots of resources. But again, we had the vision as an organization to say, if you don't have good clinical data in this environment, it's going to be a struggle. And that commitment, that investment has really served us well. And that was 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when we made that decision to invest and do the hard work to get to a place where now we've proven our technology is highly efficacious, highly safe, and really should move towards a standard of care for this very specific patient population.
So your clinical differentiation compares you head to head with other treatments that were done in that space?
Yeah, so indirectly. So the current standard of care for cervical spine disease has been the ACDF or anterior cervical discectomy and fusion, which is a great procedure. However, again, what we wanted to compare was when you did that alone with these multiple levels of disease, adding the comorbidities, and you added our technology posteriorly, could you get a superior outcome? Not just as good, but actually a much better outcome. And that's what we went after. We wanted to show that by adding this procedure, you actually got a superior outcome for the patient. We did a 2-year design study, but we're going to follow these patients out for probably 5 years or so and see what those long-term outcomes are. But the initial interim results have been extremely exciting for our surgeon, the site investigators, as well as the patients that were in the trial as well. They got great outcomes.
And how did you realize that there was an opportunity? Because you see there's lots of products, no, and you've mentioned that the people at risk had a different had more struggle with that kind of procedure. How did you realize, or the company, that there was an opportunity so that you could enter and fill this gap?
I think as an organization, many, many years ago, coming out into the market, understanding that what we're going to learn, where we're going to learn the most value about our technology is really with our customers. We speculated there was, opportunities in certain segments, but once we got the technology through its original FDA approval, the trial, we knew it was safe. we didn't necessarily know exactly the application that was going to be the ultimate unassailable value proposition, which circumferential cervical fusion for high-risk patients ends up being, right? So with that being said, as we got that experience in the real world with our surgeons, and they kept coming back to us like, hey, this is where it works really well. You learn from your customer, right? You iterate, you keep redesigning and making the technology a little bit better, more suited to what they're trying to accomplish with their patients. And through that experience, I would call it the first, 5-6 years on the market, we really understood, hey, this is where the real value proposition is. You can use our technology in a lot of ways to get great outcomes, enhanced outcomes, especially in like revision surgery or some other variations of cervical procedures. But where the bread and butter ended up being was in this circumferential space. And we learned it from our customers. And so if you listen to the customer and you partner with your customers, I think there's a lot of value there and a lot of opportunity, right? Especially as a newer organization, smaller organization, where you can have really strong, more intimate relationships with your customers because you have a smaller customer base and you put a lot of value on what they say and their experiences. And so I give the company a lot of credit for listening to our customers, partnering with our customers, and then designing a study around what they really truly believed in.
That's really interesting. So you've not developed this product as an isolation, but you focused in a niche, go and talk to the niche, and actually delivered a tailored product exactly that fits the interest and the demands of that audience. So at the end, it's very difficult for them to now want the product because they've actually kind of like developed it with you.
Right, right. And listen, our original founders, Bruce McCormick's a neurosurgeon and practiced for years and knew there was a need in his own practice and started to design, had these thoughts and visions of what he wanted to bring to the market. And he partnered with a businessman, Jeff Smith, who was our CEO. And those two founded the company, going back to 2010. So, they had a vision of what they wanted to bring to the marketplace, but that iterated and changed a little bit as we interacted with our customers. So it's been a great journey, and that collaboration's proven extremely valuable. And we'll continue to do that. We continue to do that now, as I mentioned earlier, moving from the focus of cervical spine, which will continue to be the bread and butter and the focus for us, but we're really excited about applying this unique technology into the lumbar spine because it's a huge opportunity from a market standpoint, but there's so many patients that can benefit from our technology there as well.
And once you've developed this vision, you've developed the product with them, you created these clinical studies that show superiority, so it's really good. Have you seen any other challenge when you've said, okay, all the things of my equation are working, but now let's go to the field, let's go to the market, and let's convince surgeon by surgeon? Have you seen any bottleneck of, wow, this is difficult?
Yeah, there's
There's a lot.
a lot of obstacles back to our very early part of this conversation, but I think a couple big ones for any med tech company as they're thinking about commercialization is ultimately who's paying for the technology is the hospital or the site of service. Hospital approvals and having a value proposition for the hospital is very, very important. It's critical because the surgeon is less and less important in the ultimate decision of will this be approved or not? Will purchasing allow this technology to be available for your surgeon? Your surgeon may say, I want to use this. I see value in it. It makes total sense. But ultimately, if they're a hospital employed surgeon, the power now is at the hospital. And we're seeing a big shift from the private practice surgeon, which kind of I grew up with. 20 years ago, most surgeons were private practice in orthopedics, spine, especially. There's been a major shift over the last 10 years where now I would say the vast majority of newer surgeons are employed by the hospital. And more hospitals have bought out private practice surgeons. So they have a lot of the decision-making power. So one of the big obstacles for a new technology is how do you get on contract? How do you get approval at the hospital level? Furthermore is, insurance. The ultimate payer for the patient is the insurer. Our commercial insurer is going to cover your technology. Does your coding pathway align to, for the surgeon, the CPT codes they bill with? Is that favorable for them? Is that code roll up to our DRG system, which, here in America, the DRG is how reimbursements happen at the hospital. is that a favorable reimbursement for the hospital? And then ultimately, so you've got multiple stakeholders that you've got to appease and make sure that all these things align, right? So the patient's got to have a great outcome. So obviously the technology's got to work. The surgeon's got to be able to choose and be excited about the technology that you're trying to bring to the market. And they want to apply that in their practice. They see value. 3 is the payer, i.e. that the hospital's got a contract and say, yes, this makes sense for us, and the insurer. So all of those stakeholders have to align. And, then there's the tactical aspects of building out a commercial team. Do you have a direct sales force? Do you have a distributor network? Do you have a hybrid network? How do you train everybody? How to get them focused on being able to elucidate the value proposition to the customer at those different levels? How do you resource that? And all those things, it's can be very complex, as you would imagine.
A really interesting thing that you've mentioned that it aligns with the example that you put in your book, no? Like in the game on the field is in the customer side, score. So in the field, you score only once, like you have one place to score. But in MedTech, to win a hospital, you not only need to score the surgeon and them getting the yes, but you also need to score the hospital, no? So what's the advice to scoring the hospital, no? And is it value-based care? How do you build this value proposition that gets hospitals excited to get your product on board?
Well, it definitely starts with the clinical evidence helps a lot.
Yeah.
When you have clinical evidence and you have really strong labeling from your regulatory body, so for us, it's the FDA, when the labeling aligns to the appropriate coding pathway, so the reimbursements work for the surgeon, and the DRG or that reimbursement for the hospital works, and you're not adding a lot of hard costs to the hospital, and that equation works, so there's an economic story or a value proposition that the hospital can understand, and they can work through it with their value analysis teams. It makes a world of difference, because if you're coming in with a Me Too product that you're asking more money for, it's more expensive, but it doesn't have a lot of differentiation, you're going to really struggle to have them change what they're already doing. And the hospitals, are under a great deal of pressure all the time to reduce costs. Reimbursements could be dropping in some instances. In many ways, they raise a little bit. However, if your value proposition on the clinical side works, but most importantly for the hospitals, the economics work, makes it a lot easier. But it starts with the clinical data. Clinical data drives all the other pieces of the puzzle. And listen, you also have to price your technology appropriately. What value are you bringing? Does that align to the reimbursements that the hospital is getting for those procedures that you're going to be used in, right? So if it's a spinal fusion, understanding what the DRG, what the reimbursement is for that type of procedure is important in the way you structure your pricing strategy as well.
Where have you seen more fallout of physicians or surgeons that maybe they don't end up scoring, or hospitals that once you have the physician on board, the hospital don't end up scoring? What do you think? Where has been the biggest challenge?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we've been really good at partnering with our hospital customers. So sometimes it takes a while to get to the right personnel or stakeholders at the hospital to get approval, but we get most of our contracts get done. It's just a matter of how long does it take, right? So I would say, yeah, the biggest problem is delay. And time is of the essence as you're trying to hit certain revenue milestones and goals. And we have a budget to work towards every year. So I'd say at the hospital level, we may have missed the basket at the time we wanted to hit it. We wanted points in the first quarter, but we got them in the third quarter, right? But we eventually got the points. On the customer side, similarly, sometimes the sales process can take longer. But ultimately, when we get our technology into the physician's hands, and they're well trained, they have a good experience with our technology with their patients, they see the value, and the business becomes very sticky. But there is a learning curve. So if we don't set expectations with our surgeon customers that there is going to be a few case learning curve, could be up to 6 cases till they really get their whole surgical team understanding how to do this procedure, we could lose them along the way. And we used to a lot more. Now, we've refined our messaging, we refined our training program, and we've made it, I think, more and more easy for the surgeon to learn our technology, adopt it, and understanding where the real high value proposition from an indication standpoint is. As I mentioned, that circumferential cervical fusion for high-risk patients, for instance, when they focus on that and we train them that and they choose the patients that fit that indication, they're very happy. So we score in both ends. Sometimes it can just take longer to score than the other one. But
Oh, you're like Michael Jordan here.
I don't know about that, but we're getting a few buckets, which is good. We're
Mhm.
getting a few buckets.
Great. And how do you see the future? How do you see the future in your space?
Well, I think with the speed at which technology is advancing, not necessarily medical technology, which it is, but AI, robotics, all these other components that can take things that in the past, maybe hours, days, weeks to crunch data, for instance. Now that's happening in seconds, right? 30 seconds. And I think you're going to see a lot of integration of things that are outside of traditional med tech are going to be used in the med tech space by the companies that will survive. The companies that don't adopt and aren't flexible and aren't moving to where the puck is going, which is different than where it's been, are going to really struggle. And you're seeing more and more consolidation, especially in our space specifically, like spine. There's been a lot of recent transactions. There's less and less big companies heavily focused on the spine space. There's a lot of small, medium companies that are out there with different various technologies, but it's a wide open market right now to see who really becomes the market leader. And I think it's the companies that are looking forward, and how do they take all this technology, all these things that are enhancing the speed and the efficiencies and applying that into the medical space. And then the other side is, on the physician side, again, the dynamics for physicians are changing rapidly. How do you align to the physician of 2030, 2040, not of 2000 or 95? Because it's a different physician, and you have to align to where that's headed. I don't have a crystal ball, but I know that it's changing rapidly for everybody. Reimbursements are changing, the financials are changing, and staying kind of ahead of that curve is where you'll see the strong survive. And there's going to continue to be great enhancements in medical technology. Here, especially again in America, we take great pride in bringing tremendous innovation to the market. However, capital has not been flowing into med tech, I think, as freely as it once was. So,
Mm.
clinical data, really disruptive technology that really changes the way that a patient can get a better outcome are going to be the ones that come to the market. The Me Too products of the past, I think, are going to struggle. You're not going to see the same product coming out in a different color over and over and over again. It
Mm.
just doesn't make sense. And people won't fund that type of business.
Do you think that to own the future, AI and these new innovative technologies that are coming in healthcare, the principles of a team, of a high performing team, would need to change as well? Or do you think that the principles remain the same?
I think some of the core principles are always going to remain the same because really high talented people figure out a way to leverage what's available to them. But when you talk about, just the folks that know how to get out, and with all the AI, with all the robotics, with all the different technical aspects, I still think there's great need for human interaction, and there's value in human interaction, especially in medical technology. Physicians want to interact with other people. They deal with patients. Patients are people. They're not robots. So there's still a high value there. And great leadership, is such a valued skill set that, that's always going to be there. And then how do those leaders make great decisions about deploying capital to be very efficient with the technologies available to them, and working smarter, maybe not always harder, but how do we work really in a very intelligent manner to achieve what we want to achieve is always going to be there. But now there's more and more resources available to you that, some of the jobs that were vital in the past aren't going to be. But the new jobs that are going to be created, what are those? How do we prompt the AI to do the thing that we needed to do? And we need expertise there. But I think generally there's a lot of the core principles and foundations for high performance teams will maintain. They will stick.
I think you've mentioned something quite different, no? In MedTech, will everyone kind of focuses so much in the technology, but you also focus so much in the personal aspect because, as you've mentioned, people buy from people. So yes, there's going to be AI. Yes, there's going to be new MedTech, but there's always going to be like And we always would like to have this doctor kind of that holds your hand and that will tell you, we're going to go through this together. And also they buy from other people as well. So designing a sales process that kind of builds this interaction is quite key. And it's something that you've been doing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's a human business still. Unlike software or some other spaces where, listen, I buy software for our organization all the time and I love dealing with a great salesperson, on the other side. And it's a huge turnoff if the salesperson isn't effective or isn't able to bring value to me. So I think that the continued professional development of a professional salesperson, especially in medtech, is still a good investment, and finding the best people to build teams around that share a passion for improving patient outcomes in our business is, it's super inspiring and motivational. And we just got done with a new hire training class last week. We had 10 new sales representatives join our organization, which again,
Wow.
for a company that had
Mhm.
30 sales reps, now we have 40 sales reps. That's
No.
a big increase, right? It was a huge increase. So, but spending a week with these super passionate medical sales professionals was very inspiring to me. Even somebody that's been doing this for several years, I was amped up at the end of the week and so excited for the type of people that we were able to train and interact and learn from, because now they're going to go out and we're going to scale, right? And we're going to have more touches with more physicians to treat more patients. And that's really exciting. That helps us move closer to our mission of creating a standard of care.
Well, really interesting. I think that we've learned a lot with this conversation, and it has been really special because we've combined principles that athletes use to play in their game, but we've applied this into medtech and health tech. So I think the value of this will be really interesting. And if you are interested on hearing more about how all this works and to learn about these principles, there's going to be the link of the here below, so you can go and see and download it and have a read. So thank you so much, Jeremy.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it. It was a fun conversation.
Bye.